enthousiasmé ce matin. Il y a plein d'échanges qui se poursuivent par rapport à la rencontre d'hier. Mais c'est vraiment important qu'on recommence. Je vais vous expliquer brièvement le programme de la journée pour que les gens sachent un peu ce qui va arriver ce matin et cet après-midi. Alors, premièrement, nous allons revenir sur les ateliers d'hier. Est-ce que je peux avoir votre attention? Là, je vois... bon. Alors, on va revenir sur les ateliers d'hier. Vous vous rappelez que Nicole Valentine avait fait un atelier et qu'on n'avait pas eu le temps d'avoir des gens qui rapportent. Il y avait 5 groupes. Alors, on essayait d'avoir des gens qui rapportent l'atelier d'hier après-midi, mais très brièvement, 1 ou 2 minutes, parce que ensuite, on va aussi revenir pour permettre à Catherine, que je ne vois pas, pour permettre à Catherine de faire un wrap-up par rapport à sa présentation d'hier, parce que malheureusement, on a dû couper et elle n'était pas allée jusqu'au bout de ce qu'elle voulait nous présenter. Alors, ça devrait nous amener vers 9h20. Ensuite, on va avoir une présentation de M. Kétan Chandarkas qui va nous parler des enjeux de la gouvernance intersectorielle. Et pour 45 minutes, sa présentation est à peu près de 30 minutes pour laisser du temps pour les échanges. Ensuite, on va avoir une présentation de 3 pays. C'est Mme Anna Stevenson qui va être la modératrice et il va avoir l'expérience du Burundi, du Bhoutan et du Québec qui vont être présentées. Par la suite, on va avoir une pause et au retour, il va y avoir un échange avec vous. Et on va demander à Mme Catherine Winterup de se joindre à nous parce que quand elle a fait la présentation hier, on n'a pas eu le temps de poser des questions par rapport à l'expérience de Wales. Ensuite, on va avoir le dîner et en fait, avant-midi, je vous expliquerai un peu le déroulement de cet après-midi. Juste vous mentionner qu'on va revenir un peu plus tôt aussi du dîner. On va revenir vers 13h15 parce qu'on a un après-midi assez chargé. Alors, je vous remercie beaucoup. Pour ce qui est, il y avait 5 groupes hier qui avaient été les mêmes 5 groupes. Puis Nicole nous demandait est-ce que les gens peuvent avoir un rapporteur qui nous dit un peu ce qui s'était discuté hier. On ne vous l'a pas dit, alors je ne sais pas si les gens ont rapporté leurs notes pour nous faire un petit résumé. Alors, est-ce qu'il y aurait quelqu'un du premier groupe? Puis pour être certain, pouvez-vous venir en avant? Je sais que je vous donne juste 2 minutes, mais c'est que sinon, on n'entend pas au niveau de la traduction. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour. Bon, très rapidement. Et en anglais, j'ai pris des notes en anglais. I took notes in English, so. Building trust. So first, one of the first questions that was addressed was how to build trust with people you normally don't work with. People you don't see on a day-to-day basis, how to do that, how to break those silos. So how to build institutional trust. One thing, we need to have a common understanding. We need to build credibility so others can trust you. We need to go sometimes from the abstract idea to the concrete example when working with others, so illustrate how health and policies works on a case, how it leads to success, how it works, and show the partner that it actually benefits their project too. It's not for your benefit, but their benefit. Acknowledge and share power, share the credits, give fair credit to the work of others. Try to find common goals, meet the others somewhere to negotiate. Sometimes establishing a foundation, like an MOU. We discuss the advantages and challenges of building individual versus institutional trust. Individuals leave, so maybe institutionalize a bit what you have built. It can be through a job description, maybe put in a job description so it stays when the person moves on. Communicate, get together, tell the story. That was very important that we discussed that. Telling the stories, sharing the experience. Transparency, good manners. If you're taking your information or data for someone else, recognize those traits off and have reciprocity. And a big question was, how do you restore trust when it has been lost? That's a challenge, and that was a big discussion regarding governments, when the population has lost trust in governments. And for question 2, we kind of decided we had discussed it in question 1, but maybe something we would add to the framework was engaging the community. And something that was proposed was to use health and health policies to build trust, and not to build trust to use health and health policies, but to use the tool as a first exercise to working with others to build trust. So not the other way around. Was that not clear? Maybe not clear. Kind of. Thank you.
Can you come at the microphone?
Good morning. I'm Sabrina Broadhead from the Northwest Territories, and I'd like to build on some of the comments from the previous group. We talked about how important building relationships from the ground up is crucial to building trust. And in the context where I live, there's not a lot of trust in government. With colonization, the legacy of residential schools. And so it's important that relationships are built at the community level. And there's a couple of principles in the Northwest Territories that we've adopted to help us as a government build that trust. And I shared it with the group, and they kind of like the language, so I think I'll share it with you. The first one is that the knowledge is in the room. So really adopting the principle of understanding that the people that are there are the people that know this best, and that we need to listen to them and use language that they understand and that they're comfortable with. The other one is one that we've adopted from the First Nations Health Authority in BC, which is nothing about us without us, which means we don't build anything without meeting with people at the community level, at the regional level, and at the territorial level. And I'm really excited to be here because our current Deputy Minister previously lived in Newfoundland, where they are implementing health and all policies, and we have just last week elected a groundbreaking government. And so when you talk about governance, having the right flavor is really, really important. And we have just elected a government where almost 50% of the members are female, and over 50% are Indigenous. So I think that an opportunity around building trust around this work will be huge for us. So that was that was number one. Number two, I think what we talked about was, around entry. I think the focus for me, what I took away from our chat was the entry points really depend on your context. And for us, in where I live and in smaller places in Canada, it really starts at the community. And so it's important for us to remember that. And so the two takeaways from our group are the knowledge is in the room and nothing about us without us. Thank you.
Another group. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Julian Fisher. I'm representing group or team 3. We talked about trust particularly at the beginning and very sort of, on an individual level, we said that it was quite emotional and it was often attached to people, but also processes. So then we came to the question, we looked at it in terms of governments and department, and we felt that trust really needs to be, you could have it at all sorts of different levels, but if we're looking at departments, if we're looking at health and policies, that trust needs to be established between people right at the very top of the organisation for that to sort of have an effect throughout the whole organisation. The other thing is that we sort of talked about three terms: confidence in, we talked about belief, so I believe in you, I believe in the vision, but trust is something very different because you're giving a part of you to someone else, whereas you can be confident in someone and you can believe in someone, but there's no emotional giving of something of you to that process. So we felt we didn't really look at the questions per se as two individual ones. We looked at them as a sort of holistic exercise, and we felt that came back to leadership and governance, because leadership is about trust in people, and you, as Roger said, you've got to have trust in the process as well. And I think it links into the lady who spoke before me, that it needs to be a constant process, and it needs to be from the ground up. So that building of taking what the knowledge in the room is and then putting it into that process is very important. And the other thing in terms of Roger wanted to make, had a very good point, is that you have a leader, but you have a responsible leader, so that person has a title, a role, and responsibilities, but also it's the effectiveness, the effective leader, and that's something that's invested, that people invest in someone because we believe in you, we trust you. So there's a role, but there's also an investment, which is this trust, and that's the legitimacy. So that person can legitimately say, I represent this community because the community trusts me. And that has to be built over a long period of time. And then Eduardo said that you need to constantly validate that trust, which is again what Nicole was talking about. It's not just like, I trust you and that's it. It's a constant process. And I think it, again, resonates with the lady here before me. You don't do anything without my permission, and that basically means you just got to keep on going back to your constituents and saying, is that okay? Yes, it is. Okay, I can then go forward, and people trust me, therefore what I'm saying has the weight of the community behind me. So we felt that leadership and governments, it all comes back to those two things, and we feel that trust is an essential part, and there's a whole set of processes behind that. So, did that cover everything, Group 3? So, yeah. Okay.
Group 4. Is there somebody from the Group 4? Thank you.
Yes, good morning. Corey Newdorf. So on behalf of Group 4, just a few things to add. We felt that first talking about the absence of trust was an issue, that sometimes lack of trust can be a factor when groups get together who don't normally get together and they feel that perhaps their own funding might be at risk by participating, or if new funding is being proposed, that are they going to get their share of it? So how do you overcome some of that innate lack of trust? And of course, going back to what we heard yesterday on trying to find that win-win proposal for groups is often key to establishing that trust. But also we felt having a neutral spokesperson was important, someone that was perceived as not having as many perhaps vested interests, that is a key spokesperson on behalf of the large group. We had some examples that we shared of where that worked. And also we talked about the fact that sometimes in diverse partnerships, you don't have equally accountable people at the table. And if an organization is sending someone more junior when others are sending senior people, it sort of reflects on how committed they might be to the process. And so trying to make an expectation around equally accountable people is important. But then that's not enough. We felt that you need to also then communicate within each of your organizations. So when you go away from those meetings and then your staff are trying to connect with these agencies, that they all get the message that collaboration and cooperation and trust is needed for working on this project, and sometimes that's where collaborations fail. For the second question, we talked about the framework, and we felt that yes, there are different levels of trust that might be needed in different parts of that framework. We really felt that starting with building trust on reporting, monitoring, and evaluation was really a foundational aspect. If you build trust in those areas, then often trust in the rest of the framework becomes a lot easier. And that's where sometimes sharing of information, trusting another organization to analyze your information correctly or having the ability to speak into it was very important. And that capacity building may have less trust issues if you've invested in that other area first. We felt that supportive structures can help to build trust, but certainly there needs to be transparency in those structures if you want to build trust. And then the last point was that flexibility in structure and methods is often needed as you're approaching intersectoral initiatives and projects to ensure trust and buy-in. So we gave some examples of needing to hear everybody's perspective on what the project should be about or what the initiative should be. It sometimes evolves over time, and you need to be able to make sure that those perspectives are taken into account as they're voiced. So essentially building in agility into the framework was important.
Thank you. And the last group?
Hi, we had some interesting discussions as well and built upon some of the points that were just made from the previous 4 groups. We started from a point for question 1 about our own personal practices about building relationships. So we gave some examples about how we do that. And some of those include like whether we have the time. We always try to have a personal practice to say, yes, we'd like to talk if somebody reaches out to you. And looking at how we embed some of those practices across organizations. We also talked about some of the hindrances and actually moved into how those hindrances can actually be supportive for building other trusting relationships. In government, sometimes we have turnover across departments. We would have invested in those types of relationships, but when those people move to other departments, we have the opportunity then to build and leverage those relationships to maybe get into other areas, other sectors, and so while we do have some turnover, you can build upon that, and that comes with building those trusting relationships. Some of the other things we talked about in the second question was helpful to know that I was going to call them trapezoids again. Each of the sections in the different HIAP framework requires different levels of trust, whether that's at the individual level, whether that's at a group level. So we talked about the importance of the coming to the table and understanding what we each have to bring to the table and understanding each really what we bring to that relationship and the importance of building capacity across our networks and really looking at how we frame actions when we're looking at what are the initiatives that we're looking at.
Thank you. Merci. Alors, comme mentionné, on va laisser 5 minutes à Catherine Winthrop to terminer, to conclude. Je parle en français pour terminer son atelier, parce que hier, on a coupé ça rapidement pour aller au lancement. Alors, Catherine, we have 5 minutes for you to conclude your yesterday workshop.
morning, everyone. Anyway, I just want to say thank you very much for your active participation yesterday. I think you call it graveyard slots in Britain. That sort of end of the day, everyone was tired, but thank you. You all participated very well. One thing I didn't get a chance to mention was the other tool that we have developed. I talked about the findings of the literature review enabling us to think about how we operationalise sustainable development at different levels. So we talked about individual, team and organisational. The work that we're doing to really harness the energies and the commitment of individuals in our workplaces, in particular across our public service, is called Be the Change. So we've borrowed that from the UN SDG campaign slogan. And that really has been very much sort of staff-led. We're trying to kind of help staff put those ways of working into practice. But often that's through various themes that they feel would be helpful in their work. So the kinds of themes that we've been looking at are walking the talk, which is advice on active and sustainable travel, sustainability on the agenda, which is about how to take the practical steps to organise sustainable meetings and events. These are very simple pieces of guidance and recommendations, but they just help staff be more sustainable in their everyday practice. Reducing our waste measurements, which is about how we reduce our carbon footprint and environmental impact, and creating equal workplaces. So these are some of the themes. So what we're looking for, and if anyone felt predisposed to do this, was the chance to test some of these materials in your contexts. So, we have the prompt cards that you've tried and experienced, the SIFT workshop, which is our 2-hour team workshop, and then Be the Change, which is a campaign that staff might feel help them in terms of generate those ways of working. So if you would like to try any of those materials, I hope by the end of today I'll have a form produced which will sort of summarise each of the materials available, and then you could take that away and contact us, and we can supply you with the prompt cards. Unfortunately, there'll be a small fee for postage, etc., but I will hopefully detail that on the form. And then the rest of the materials are downloadable, that you could just use them in your context. So ideally, we've made this offer to our European partners. I talked about the joint action that we're part of. So a number of other countries in Europe are trying to use them at the moment, and if you, as part of our global network, would be prepared to do that as well, that would be very helpful. And we're looking to follow up and get your comments back by the end of November. So we want you to try them in the next month or so. And then, based on the feedback, we want to try and refine the products and I hope make them as transferable as possible to international context. So I will get the forms, and please feel free to test them in your countries. That would be great.
Merci Catherine pour partager avec nous tous les outils. Thank you for sharing all what you've done in Wales. Maintenant, on va passer aux présentations des panélistes. Alors, Madame Anna Stevenson. Oh! Mon Dieu! J'étais à la mauvaise page de mon programme. Désolée. Alors, je recommence. Nous allons maintenant aller à M. Ketan Shankardas, who is going to present, qui va nous présenter les enjeux de la gouvernance internationale, intersectorielle, c'est-à-dire. Alors, on va avoir une présentation d'à peu près 30 minutes et après, on va avoir le temps pour les échanges. Merci beaucoup. Merci, Sophie.
thank you. Let me figure out the technology, big green button. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so thank you, and I'd like to start by thanking Louise and the other organizers of the meeting for inviting me to speak today and for giving me a chance to meet so many of you and to learn from you who are actually doing the work of using a GNHiAP approach in your various roles and settings. I'd really like to emphasize how wonderful it feels to be here at a meeting that could only be happening in 2019 of a growing global network of countries, cities, and institutions interested in the concept of GNHiAP. We know that integrated governance for health and equity has been tried out by a few modern governments for decades now in some cases, and as we were discussing over breakfast, more traditional societies likely had this idea more naturally integrated in their ways of managing society. But this is an idea that's certainly begun to be adopted and implemented much more widely in recent years at various levels of government and all over the world. Since I first read about GNHiAP back in 2010, it has always been a great idea to me. And to see more and more governments interested in using GNHiAP as a way of moving beyond rhetoric about health prevention and health equity is unbelievable to the cynic in me. I'm actually very optimistic, but that optimism rests on a tough face of pessimism that I've just come to accept and live with. But the upshot is that I often worry about whether or not those governments are ready to take advantage of the opportunity. Is this the only opportunity we'll have to really make this kind of progress? And this has been a motivating factor for my own scholarship in the area. So today I'm going to speak about one big complicated factor that appears to be hindering the implementation of GNHiAP in various ways in the case settings that our research team, Harmonics, has been studying, which is political conflict. The idea that politics can get in the way of GNHiAP seems about right. It's been raised on several occasions in published work about GNHiAP, sometimes in the way of advice for those embarking on the project, as in the framework for country action. It's number one there, establish the needs and priorities for GNHiAP, including by assessing the political context. Or else, political factors are described as a part of the problem in case studies of GNHiAP implementation, as in this very recently published report on 9 case studies about implementing GNHiAP by the Health Foundation in the UK. They raised a number of facilitators, but also concluded that there were 5 key complex barriers. And my reading of them is that the first 3 are clearly driven by, in part at least, by political conflict, and that the 5th will contribute to a lack of political support for the 4th. So I think a lot of the barriers that are hindering the implementation of GNHiAP are tied up with politics. The role of politics in the implementation of GNHiAP has been a topic of interest to our research team in recent years, and we've been calling for more of a focus on understanding how and why politics can get in the way. Again, as one of the many possible things that can hinder implementation, precisely when that valuable opportunity comes around for a government. As an aside, actually, before I get to our research team, it's a nice coincidence that the session we just finished reporting back on was about building and maintaining trust across sectors when using GNHiAP. And I had a chance to read the article by Tony Delane Crowe and Carmel Williams and others from South Australia about how trust helps to bridge the unknown to the known. And that resonates quite nicely with some of the lessons for preparing for these political conflicts that I'll tell you about. So before I get onto the evidence, I'll tell you a little bit about our Harmonics team, because it's certainly not just me that's doing this work. It includes several scientists and trainees, including Maria Gugluman, who some of you might have met in the back, who's wrapping up her dissertation about GNHiAP implementation at the local level in the Kuopio strategy in Finland. Across a series of CIHR awards, we've been studying case examples of GNHiAP implementation globally, first with a focus on higher-level governments, and now moving forward, we've just started data collection on a series of local case studies here in Quebec and Ontario. And I'll focus more on the higher-level case studies today, but I'll give you a sense of what we're focusing on with the local cases moving forward at the end. So these are the case studies that Harmonics has been studying, and we've been using a realist explanatory approach, which really just means that we focus primarily on learning about the hidden and intersecting mechanisms that appear to explain implementation outcomes in these case settings. And we also aim to understand how the specific circumstances of each case setting affect those apparent causal pathways. Because of the complexity of the phenomena that we're trying to understand, we found it useful to use a systems theory approach by describing a framework of the salient subsystems and components that our evidence has thus far indicated are influential in the implementation of GNHiAP. And these include a mix of particularly influential roles in government, such as high-ranking civil servants within each sector, and political elites in the leadership, and expert advisors who are brought in, and other influential properties of the system. For example, the policy agenda of the new leadership that comes into a government when GNHiAP is already happening. This framework has helped us to make sense of our retrospective data, to understand what happened and why, and we published it hoping that practitioners like you might find some value in reflecting on their own experiences with implementing GNHiAP to support them in forecasting and planning accordingly to mature their GNHiAP initiatives over time. Let me now define the types of political conflict that we focused on within the broad topic of politics. First, given that GNHiAP implies a shift in the boundaries of usually long-standing policy silos, we expected that there may be conflict related to competing sectoral interests. For example, this might have come about because some sectors stood to have a harder time meeting their mandate because of the policy approaches needed to improve health or equity. We also expected that integrated governance might pose a threat to turf that's traditionally managed by one sector of the government. For example, if a sector was in charge of regulating some aspect of the private sector, and if GNHiAP then brought in actors from another sector to try and influence those relationships, there might be some competing interests at work. Second, since the implementation of GNHiAP is concerned with improving health equity, a lack of buy-in from diverse people in government could reflect disagreement on collective social values or a particular normative construction of fairness. There could even be workplace cultures within sectors that aren't particularly anti-equity, but are just focused on other ideas, like the efficiency sought from the engineering culture of transportation planners, and the medicalization of health problems and focus on clinical interventions and outcomes of healthcare planners. So there's a potential for ideological conflict between the different policy agents representing these diverse interests and ideas. We expected that both of these conflicts would have the potential to manifest as disinterest in or a lower prioritization of GNHiAP by policy agents in some sectors. And this could weaken the formulation of policies that emerge from GNHiAP, or lead to resistance to participating altogether in other sectors, thus narrowing the impact on health equity over time. Moreover, we anticipated that these would be unavoidable conflicts, both because of the paradigm shift that GNHiAP represents when adopted by a government, but also because, essentially these are within the sector, the different ideologies and objectives of their mandates and the different levels of power they have. So when you start to integrate governance, those are going to have to play out. But then, of course, the other reason we expect this to happen is because executive leadership of government, which is the subsystem in the upper left, it changes with regularity by design. So we have to do GNHiAP anticipating that new political elites with unique agendas, unique ideologies will be coming down the line sooner or later with the power to reinterpret and reapply the GNHiAP approach. And that this could create new types of political conflict amongst the sectors working on implementation. Okay, so I'm going to get into some empirical findings now, and let me preface this by letting you know that our focus on mechanisms during our interviews had left us with quite a bit of data to help explain the different findings. And I'm not going to be able to go very deep very often in the interest of time today, but we really thrive on critically assessing our interpretations. So, and always trying to dig deeper on our explanations. So if you have any questions, or if you have alternative explanations or ideas about what we're finding, please feel free to challenge me or ask for more details after my talk, later today or tomorrow. Okay, all right, so these are findings from across 6 of our case studies about whether or not we saw evidence about these ideological conflicts and the jurisdictional conflicts, or the competing sectoral interests. And did we see them actually hindering the implementation of GNHiAP? And as you can see, with ideological conflicts within the different cases, there was limited to adequate evidence, which basically means that it was there in all of the cases, but it wasn't a particularly strong determinant of whether or not GNHiAP was progressing or slowing down. Overall, across the cases, there was low evidence that ideological conflicts were really what was at the root of hindering implementation. We did see a little bit more of it in some settings, but really what we found, I think the strong finding here is that in each and every case setting, those competing sectoral interests, they're going to happen, and they are going to slow down implementation. They're going to make health equity less of a focus. And so I think we would do a good to prepare for these and to anticipate them and plan for them. So in general, we saw conflicts between economic, in terms of the ideological conflicts, we see conflicts between economic and health and social sectors about ideologies about what was the right move for a government to make. This led to less buy-in by those economic sectors, and the equity interventions that materialized were weaker than they could have been because of that trading off of ideas. We also saw conflict between equity advocates outside of government and governments when they were doing GNHiAP. So for example, equity advocates were calling for stronger interventions, more rights-based interventions, whereas the government was trying to solve problems with maybe more band-aid solutions. And this was at the local level and at the national level of implementation. The partnerships became less agreeable, the equity interventions were again weaker than they could have been, and longer timelines were needed for implementation. Some case-specific findings, for example, in California, there was a lot of cultural institutional resistance in the transportation and the engineering or the planning sectors, as there was a push to develop more active transportation systems. So they wanted more cycling and walking because of GNHiAP, and people in these other sectors were having a hard time with these as legitimate forms of transportation early on. And not really understanding why would we build a roadway that is less efficient. This is what we've been trained to do, is to make people get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. So the engineering culture of the public works sectors were hindering the appreciation of healthier built environments. These are some older findings from our first 3 case studies, but I know that there are people from South Australia and, of course, Quebec here, so I thought I would cover them as well. We saw that in South Australia, ideological conflict was quite well managed with a win-win strategy, which did bring people into GNHiAP who might not have wanted to participate, but in the short term, it led to weaker equity interventions. And then in the longer term, the idea was that the relationships would strengthen, the trust would build, and you'd get better equity interventions. Awareness raising also helped to go to other sectors and teach them about what GNHiAP is and why we're doing this. And it did help sectors to understand and appreciate health equity values. And maybe one of the contextual factors there was that there was this dedicated team of people working there on GNHiAP who were there to go out there and make these relationships, to do exactly what we've just been talking about earlier today. In Quebec, at the national level, there was actually some built-in ideological agreement about GNHiAP. I think it reflects a longer-standing culture of an integrated view of health and social outcomes in Quebec, which facilitated in-kind support from different partners and strengthened the potential impact on health equity. That was at the national level, and at the regional local level, there was some existing tension about managing relationships and implementation of work But that kind of ideological conflict that was there was overcome, which helped to address these existing conflicts over who was in control of these things. So competing interests sort of about the regional, local trade-off and who's in charge of what. In terms of those competing interests, which we found everywhere, the good news is that in most of our cases that gets better over time. So in due course, you work out those jurisdictional issues. In the short term, there was less buy-in, fewer financial resources available for implementing GNHiAP, and it just didn't seem very sustainable initially until you got over that initial hump. In Quebec, policies of economic sectors were informally excluded from Section 54 of the Public Health Act and the need for health impact assessment. So that again reflects some sort of competing interest to where the executive basically said, no, we don't need to do it there. In California, there was conflicts again over the objectives of the transportation sector and the environmental health outcomes that were being pursued by other health and social sectors. There was also a fear in those engineering sort of cultures about health taking over public works. So they were getting a bit protective about GNHiAP. And in Ecuador, it was described to us that before the election of Correa, sectors were there really to help facilitate private sector interests, quite in an unregulated way, and that when they came in and introduced these coordinating ministries, it threatened a lot of relationships, established relationships between ministries and private interests. And that, for example, when those coordinating ministries tried to make changes in food labeling and pharmaceutical price regulation, it uncovered a lot of competing interests and hindered implementation for a while. So what strategies can help engage different policy sectors into GNHiAP? Back in our first 3 case studies, we tested 3 different strategies that we saw in our 3 cases at that time. Can you go out there and just raise awareness, and that'll sort of help people in different sectors see the importance of adapting their own objectives? Do you use a top-down strategy that uses power to compel participation? Doesn't matter what you're focused on, you've got to start doing this with us now as well. Or do you use a win-win strategy? And at this time, that was something that was coming out as a really potentially useful approach to GNHiAP from teams in South Australia, from teams in Sweden, where you seek the dual outcomes. And we found pretty strong evidence that a win-win strategy is the most effective strategy. In those 3 cases, top-down approaches and awareness raising can be useful, but they have to be done in concert with a win-win strategy, otherwise they're not very effective. We also learned about some of the mechanisms. How do you make these win-win strategies work? We learned about how you make them work by developing a shared language over time about the work that you're doing, because different sectors have different cultures that speak about the same things in different ways. And part of it is just about getting to know your neighbor and realizing that you're both talking about some of the same things here. There are tools like HIA that can help facilitate policy coordination and make that win-win approach happen. You can integrate health into other policy agendas and get these 2 outcomes, or maybe even more than 2 outcomes, to make partnerships work. And you can use scientific evidence. So we found that people in other sectors really listened when there was scientific evidence about I need to do something, rather than just a really compelling argument. Top-down approaches were counterproductive. So, for example, in Quebec, somebody told us less preaching, more serving when it comes to health. And in California, somebody told us, I don't know if annoyed is the best word to use, but just, the terminology of health in all policies, right, that it's all about health. Except when they're not. So in Ecuador, a very strong transformative mandate was brought in and adopted by the Correa government, and it resulted in increased buy-in for GNHiAP implementation across diverse sectors. And it's because the political elites there, including the president, used a lot of formal authority, so a lot of their power, as well as their leadership, their ability to convey the importance of these things, to get buy-in. They were working very hard to make sure that this got implemented. And they also mobilized a lot of the government's resources to make sure that GNHiAP was being implemented well. Now, of course, this is not the sort of context that is replicated in many parts of the world. The context that the Ecuador GNHiAP came into was, you could say, maybe ripe for a big transformative agenda. Kind of similar to what happened when the National Health Act was brought in Thailand. And so, I think a strong top-down approach could work, it can be effective, but I just don't know that it's very applicable to many global settings that are going to be using GNHiAP. So there is evidence that it works. I'm not sure if it's going to be relevant to many of our settings. Actually, we have studied how do these political elites use their power to make GNHiAP work in our case settings. We theorize that, political elites like presidents, prime ministers, they have formal authority. They have the power by decree to make some things happen. And do they use that power to make GNHiAP work? Political elites also use their leadership, their collegial nature, their arguments, their persuasiveness, the soft skills. And what we found was that in terms of the role of those political elites in helping the implementation of GNHiAP along, we found evidence in every jurisdiction that they were using those soft skills. They were really advocating for GNHiAP to make it happen. Formal authority, not so much. So I told you about Ecuador, and there was a clear example there of the political elites using their formal authority to transform government, inject it with resources, and make this happen. But in all of the other settings, we didn't really see political elites using their formal authority to help GNHiAP along. In fact, if anything, in Finland, we saw some examples of political elites acting, using their formal authority to, if anything, hinder the implementation of GNHiAP at times. And one way to think about this might be that those three countries on the top are quite neoliberal in terms of their broader agendas. So maybe GNHiAP isn't in the best interests of the executive leadership of those governments. And maybe they'll speak about it and about its importance, but they might not really act in favor of it when push comes to shove. So we might not expect our political elites to necessarily do the work for us. They'll be there to move the rhetoric along, but we might not rely on them when push comes to shove. These are more cross-case findings about, okay, so the win-win approach, this is what we want to be doing. How do we make the win-win approach work? So we talked about the different mechanisms, and what we looked at in these 6 case studies was how effective, how effective was this shared language, developing a shared language and developing that over time? How effective was the using multiple outcomes and making sure that other sectors had a piece of what was going to happen, serving their own mandates? And then a third approach is the public health arguments. In some cases, a win-win approach works by not necessarily giving a dual outcome, but by showing other sectors that if you work on public health objectives, that you're going to be seen favorably because of the structure of what GNHiAP is. That you'll be rewarded in some way by working on public health. So there is a win there. It's not a dual outcome, but there's a win for the sector. And what we found was the shared language approaches and the multiple outcomes approaches were quite prevalent in different settings. There was a lot of evidence that they worked. For example, I think there's limited evidence in Finland because there's already a long-standing culture in Finland and some of the other Scandinavian countries in Quebec of already thinking about health and social challenges as interrelated. And I think that shared language might have already been developed in Finland, and that's why we didn't see it as a big mechanism there. The win-win multiple outcomes approach, limited evidence in Ecuador, again, because they didn't really need that. They used their formal authority, their power to really transform government and make GNHiAP happen in a sense. And then we didn't really see that the public health arguments approach was very much used, actually. And just in a couple of settings, we saw a bit of evidence. And in Finland, it did seem to be quite a strong facilitator, and that might be because of the structure of their approach to GNHiAP, where they basically did reward other sectors for playing along, in a sense. Some other advice for moving forward is to play the long game with GNHiAP, that it's not necessarily going to materialize as you want it immediately. So in Quebec and South Australia, we've heard about how they focused on less equity-intensive short-term goals to develop relationships so that in the future they could work on stronger equity interventions. And then I think another thing that we don't necessarily do very much of, but that has been on people's minds quite a bit, is evaluating GNHiAP, because evidence about whether or not this works is going to be important, I think, for maintaining the momentum in using HiAP. And so some of the things we've got to think about here are how do you do both economic evaluation and health equity evaluation? It's not just sort of a simple approach to evaluation. The idea that impacts on health equity are mid to long term. So what changes in the short term in terms of social, health, and economic outcomes can we anticipate, maybe to show that things are progressing in the right direction, and then what do we expect to find at a longer time scale to show that this is really working? And here logic models are your friend. So the more you can map out precisely what you expect to be happening over what time scale, I think will enable you to do evaluations that are appropriate. So that you're not looking for big impacts on health equity in the first couple of years of implementing HiAP. And then, of course, the complexity of it all. So untangling the web of causation given multiple interventions at work at different points in time. And thinking maybe more about collective impact models and how those have been used in evaluations. So moving forward, we are now studying the implementation of HiAP in 3 local governments in Ontario and 3 local governments in Quebec. And we're interested to now see all of our evidence from these higher levels of government. How do they apply at the more local levels? Is it the same mechanisms at work, or are there some unique challenges and unique facilitators? We're also interested in the difference of the provincial context. So in Quebec, of course, they've been doing HiAP for quite a long time now. In Ontario, not so much. And I don't really have a lot of hopes that at the provincial level in Ontario there will be much going on. And so how does that influence what's happening at the local level? One of the things we're thinking about here is the idea that Storm and their colleagues introduced with the maturity model of HiAP, that you have to think about HiAP as a fundamentally different intervention over time, that it's only going to become strong after going through some more immature stages. So we're looking at these cases, we're talking to people about, when you first got those teams together and got people around the table for the first few meetings, how did that go? What facilitated building relationships? What facilitated interventions? And then, now that implementation is happening today and you've matured a little bit, what's facilitating things to keep going along and continue maturing? So we're using Storm's model to think about these kind of 2 phases of intervention of HiAP. And so the sort of fuzzy line there is sort of more about the turbulence of those forming, norming, storming parts of building teams. And we might be able to learn, are there differences in the time to launch of a newly initiated HiAP, and what are the determinants of those differences? What mechanisms led some HiAPs to get going more quickly and other HiAPs to take a little bit more time? Okay, and with that, I'd like to thank you again for having me at this important meeting. I know that the mission of the network is to work with stakeholders to address the determinants of health directly. And that sounds quite applied to me, but it will surely serve as a regular venue for sharing ideas and disseminating evidence about this idea in practice so that we can transform governance away from policy silos in a way that avoids short-term failure and achieves some unique form of integrated governance for health and equity. All right, thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Let me ask you about those 6 that were in the case. In terms of cost, now I'm not sure whether you measured cost per individual, but was there any commonality in terms of cost per case?
We didn't actually, no. We didn't really focus too much on trying to calculate how much was this all costing. We did study how were financial incentives or the funding of it influential, but we didn't actually get at absolute costs.
And what about the number of individuals served? Was that?
So the cases that you saw were all, state level, national level initiatives. So they had a relatively larger target area, but they would have all been quite variable because of the nature of the interventions. I mean, you're right, there are going to be different amounts of people served. So in California, it's a much more grassroots approach to GNHiAP, where the state government is interested in it and they're facilitating it and calling for it, but they're relying on local level action to foment and to happen. So the coverage is going to be quite variable. Whereas in Quebec, they introduced the Public Health Act that essentially, except for some of the economic policies, so that all new policies for everyone in the province will be improved. So you're right that there's also going to be a variation in the coverage, yeah.
The next question was the ratio, then the ratio.
Just on resource use, there is something in the global report. Section 3.2 looks at resources for health in all policies. So in the survey, they did capture some small indicators of resources in terms of personnel, at least, on the input side. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks for this great presentation. You know, it's always nice to see research different concepts in a very complex thing. I want to present myself. I'm the chief MOH of the province of Quebec, and I'm working with my team on this issue. And I'm just wondering, and it's not an easy question, how the economics and the effect of prevention, calculation of the effect of long-term, could be a thing to explain. You know, we've got a prime minister, actually, who was an economist who worked creating a company of airplanes. So we know when he puts a box somewhere, he wants to know what's going to happen. And I know we cannot evaluate the cost of these complex issues, but all in the, I would say, trying to get the trust or making even the evidence to the economics that they will get money back from the investment is something that must be taken into account. And do you have any references? Because I'm always trying to find the simple things like I will probably have to meet the minister soon, the prime minister soon with my minister. And I'm just trying, and we know that when we vaccine that thing, we're going to have this thing, you know. And always people want to make it simple when we are talking about health determinants will take years to happen. But how, in this experience that you looked at, this issue was addressed or not? And please give me the answer, because I need it.
Okay,
I need that for the next 2 weeks, please. So I would like to kidnap you and come with me.
So unfortunately, I don't have the answer. I mean, the reality is there has not, because there has not been economic or even a very much rigorous evaluation of GNHiAP, it's never something that becomes a part of the argument for implementing it. Not yet, until we start to see those evaluations come out. What I would say, though, is, for example, I think what would work might be to focus in on the very precise interventions that happen within GNHiAP and evidence that those are potential cost savers down the line. So, for example, just this week, it's still just in its early access phase in Nature Psychiatry, I think. There was an evaluation of the at-home chez soi, the housing first intervention. From the Toronto site, they just published the 6-year evaluation. In terms of health and social outcomes, it's quite effective for keeping people out of homelessness, particularly if they have mental health needs. And then they do provide evidence of cost savings, that the cost of doing this approach compared to dealing with homelessness and all the impacts on services and criminal justice, and it's far cheaper. So I think if you could start to talk about some of the big issues that you're dealing with and show in a more piecemeal fashion that health and all policies is this idea and it will lead to these types of savings potentially. That might be one strategy. There was also another paper which I'm not going to be able to speak about it precisely because it's been a couple of years, but there was a good modeling exercise done in Canada about the long-term implications of a more health preventive approach. And I'll share that with you because that might be a good one to sort of take around to people and say, we think this is going to work. Yeah. What's that? No, it was a researcher from U of T, and yeah. Yeah.
It's not at all I know that we need the trust, all the other issues and everything, but I just want to make a caution. Even if I only talk about economics and cash and things, I'm not cash addicted. I just want to have the means to do the job.
It's the politics of it. It's important.
No, it is. And I think it's very important also to understand have a win-win situation with their political views. What are their ideas? What are they fighting for?
Yeah.
They talk about team working between ministers, so that should appear. It's why we must not talk the same way to the PM that we will talk to our colleagues or in between us here. So, and I think that Nicole has some.
Yeah, I just wanted to. Yeah. Okay, I'll just try to be brief. Just 2 points to build on what Kittens was saying. Is one, there was a study that's used often for policy coherence by WHO for the SDGs. I can follow up on the citation for those interested, but it was recording a 40% saving through policy coherence between agriculture, environment, health, and energy sectors. And this is quoted in one of our executive board documents, and it was quite a big study on that. And then a second set of statistics being used in Swiss scenario is the savings of emergency care. Because what happens when you have a lot of inequality, you end up with overutilization of very expensive tertiary emergency care. And those numbers are quite powerful, I think. It's very intuitive in a way. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Katina from South Australia.
Hi.
So I'm really interested to hear a bit more about the top-down versus win-win. Obviously, I understand how the win-win approach works, but what I'm really wanting to understand better is with the new, with the political class that's interested in basically requiring a top-down approach to health and all policies, and you say that that's not necessarily particularly effective except in certain circumstances. I guess what I'm wondering about, and also referencing Wales's work, which clearly is a legislative agenda that's pretty well top-down, but was buttressed by an awful lot of community consultation.
Yeah.
And I get that the community consultation is not the organisations that are being forced to do what it is they have to do, so it's different segments, but it's a top and kind of bottom and leaving the middle. Can that work instead? Is that the model that well, at least that community support that kind of goes with the top down that makes it more effective?
I would suspect, because we did find, like, for example, in Quebec, it is a top-down, it's a change in what you ought to do, what you have to do, but they did use win-win approaches with the sectors. If you took that out, what I would expect, I mean, none of our cases did top-down grassroots engagement, nothing in the middle. It's like a hamburger. But I would predict that you would have a lot of jurisdictional conflict and ideological conflict that you'd have to work through amongst the sectors if you did top-down but didn't use a win-win approach with your partners in government. But I don't have any evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess the thing is, after having health and all policies in place for many years in South Australia, there are still organisations that are less prepared to go with the win-win approach. We've already made our way through.
So at this point, what do you do?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you'll have to tell us what to do.
Oui, Roger Bertrand, merci. Je vais m'exprimer en français pour être clair, si vous voulez bien. À mon ami Horatio. À mon ami Horatio qui se demande quel argument sur le plan économique présenter à son premier ministre, il y en a un qui m'apparaît évident. Depuis 30 ans au Québec, on a investi presque toutes nos marges de manœuvre dans les systèmes de soins, avec pour résultat que 50% du budget de l'État va maintenant à la santé. Donc, on n'a rien réglé. c'est un peu de Paris Pascal. Enfin, qu'est-ce qu'on a à perdre d'investir davantage dans la promotion de la santé et la prévention? On n'a rien à perdre. D'autre part, notre Premier ministre, qui est effectivement issu du milieu des affaires, devrait comprendre que s'il y a un retour positif sur l'investissement, quand on investit dans une entreprise, dans la santé, en s'inspirant des meilleures pratiques, le résultat va être la même chose à l'échelle de l'ensemble de la société quand on investira davantage en amont des problèmes. Merci.
Thank you for that. So I'll just sort of summarize what I heard, which was that, two other arguments for that economic argument that Horatio was trying to make were, number one, 30 years in Quebec, healthcare costs continue to rise, even with a health and all policies approach for the last 15 to 20 years. So what do we have to lose by doing more health prevention? And then another idea is that the Premier right now is more business-minded, and they should understand that if within businesses or investment in health provides a return on investment because of the well-being of your employees, they should understand that that is also applicable to the people of the province. I think I captured that. Okay.
Hi, Captain. This is Juan from Vancouver.
Oh, hi.
Just wondering about, in those cases that you presented, did any of them have an intentional and well-developed strategy to address those real political issues of conflict, jurisdictionally and political? And what were some of the elements and were they effective?
I mean, it's hard to know because people don't talk about politics, and in our interviews they wouldn't often raise it unless we probed and asked them about ideas and interests. So it's not something that our informants naturally talked about. They did talk about the using win-win approaches in some of the settings, and I suspect that they were anticipating that they would have to sell these ideas to other people and that this was one way of doing that. So it wasn't something that was explicitly planned for, except maybe in terms of the win-win approach to evidence. That said, in terms of these local cases, we've had our partners talking to us when we were planning the project. We wanted to know what are your main challenges at the local level so we can plan a study that will help to address them. And that is on everyone's mind, is this is a good idea, but this is going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. What can we do to make sure that people from this sector and this sector want to do it? And I think one of the things that has been talked about a little bit was the shared language strategy. So a big question I always get is, what can we talk about instead of health? And so they know that health is not going to be politically what people want to work on. Health gets more than 50% of the budget in most countries, and nobody wants to do another health intervention. So there was a paper I was going to include it in my talk about some recent evidence about using the language of living conditions instead of health, or tying living conditions to health whenever you talk about health, so that people can make that link. Yeah, sorry, I don't really have any more. Yeah.
I hope you're going to get it.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, we're just going to get started because, as Sylvie says, we're 30 minutes late. My name's Anna Stevenson. I'm a public health doctor who's come from New Zealand for this event, and I'm already learning a lot. I'm looking forward to learning more in this session, where we have 3 speakers from very different areas in the world who are coming from countries which are very different in their development levels and their socio-economic levels and their cultural practice, and they're all going to give us some case studies of how they are implementing a health and all policies approach in their own countries. In their presentations, we'll see how the framework that we've been presented with from WHO is being used by them. And we'll have an opportunity to ask questions, but after we're going to have the presentations, and then we'll have morning tea, and then we'll come back and we'll ask questions. So write your questions down so you don't forget them, and we'll pull them back also with our colleague from Wales to ask questions about her presentations yesterday and the 5 minutes this morning, I guess. Yeah. So we're going to start off with Leonidas Misago from Burundi. Are you ready to speak? Yeah. I'm going to give you 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes, and I will let you know when you're getting to the end.
Yeah. 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Mesdames, Messieurs les participants, bonjour. Je m'appelle Misago Leonidas. Je suis médecin burundais de santé publique. Je travaille au ministère de la Santé publique et de la lutte contre le sida. Et je suis le directeur de la promotion de la santé, de l'hygiène et de l'assainissement. Sur le plan de ma présentation, je vais d'abord parler de notre pays, et puis je vais parler du contexte et justification. Je vais parler des réalisations, de l'objectif de la stratégie, la mise en œuvre, perspective et conclusion. Le Burundi est un pays qui est situé à cheval entre l'Afrique de l'Est et l'Afrique centrale. Et il est frontalier au nord avec le Rwanda, aussi et à l'est avec la Tanzanie et à l'ouest avec la République démocratique du Congo. Et sa superficie est de 27 834 km². Ce n'est pas immense comme le Canada. Et la population est estimée à 11 495 438 en 2017. Et le Burundi, c'est un pays qui est en voie de développement. Voilà, ça c'est la carte du Burundi. Comme vous le voyez, les pays limitrophes, c'est la Tanzanie, la République démocratique du Congo et le Rwanda. Je vais maintenant parler du contexte dans lequel nous avons élaboré notre stratégie de promotion de la santé. Et pour élaborer cette stratégie, nous tenons compte des engagements du Burundi par rapport aux engagements, aux agendas mondiaux, notamment la déclaration d'Almaty sur la santé primaire, résolution de l'Assemblée mondiale de la santé sur la santé dans toutes les politiques. Nous tenons également compte des ODD, mais aussi de la déclaration d'Astana de 2018. Nous tenons également compte de ce qui existe au niveau national, les documents d'orientation. Il y a d'abord le plan national de développement sanitaire. Il y a aussi le plan national de développement sanitaire. Le plan national de développement sanitaire qui également prône le renforcement de la collaboration intersectorielle pour une meilleure santé. Et quelles sont les réalisations? Nous avons commencé ce processus en avril 2018 par la mise en place d'un comité multisectoriel technique. Nous avons procédé à la revue documentaire. Nous avons tenu des ateliers, nous avons rédigé la stratégie et nous l'avons validé, cette stratégie, au mois de mai 2019. Et nous avons présenté cette stratégie au CPSD. CPSD, c'est un cadre de partenariat du secteur de la santé pour le développement. Et au mois de septembre, nous venons de réaliser une conférence nationale dont le thème central était la santé dans toutes les politiques. Ça va très vite. Bien, voilà la démarche que nous avons utilisée. C'est une démarche qui était participative, inclusive, scientifique et innovante. Et là, quand nous avons procédé à la revue documentaire, nous avons constaté qu'il y a déjà des instances qui existent, comme la plateforme nationale de lutte contre les urgences et les catastrophes, Il y a la politique et la stratégie de prise en charge des victimes de violences sexuelles. Et il y a un Conseil national de la protection sociale qui existe. Il y a un fonds national de protection sociale, Conseil national de lutte contre le sida et un cadre de partenariat avec les partenaires. Mais on n'a pas une vision globale des choses. Malgré qu'il y a des instances intersectorielles qui existent, on n'a pas une vision globale des choses. Bien, voilà le cadre de notre stratégie de santé dans toutes les politiques. Bien évidemment, nous tenons compte de ce qui existe. Le plan national de développement du Burundi, c'est la Bible. Et puis, nous tenons compte du secteur de la santé. Le secteur de la santé, il y a les programmes qui existent au niveau du ministère de la Santé, programmes en rapport avec la santé de la reproduction, les maladies transmissibles, le paludisme, la tuberculose, la nutrition et aussi l'environnement. Et comme c'est une stratégie multisectorielle, nous sortons du ministère de la Santé et nous allons dans les autres secteurs comme l'éducation, l'environnement, l'énergie, la jeunesse, le transport, la recherche et l'enseignement supérieur. Et le Burundi aussi tient compte des engagements mondiaux, le monde qui nous entoure, le système des Nations Unies, avec tout ce qui existe comme cadre de coopération. Voilà, c'est dans ce contexte que notre stratégie a été élaborée. Et quel est l'objectif de la stratégie? L'objectif, c'est de coordonner l'information, l'éducation et la communication de façon intégrée et cohérente pour promouvoir l'approche de la santé dans toutes les politiques et faire un plaidoyer au plus haut niveau, depuis le niveau communautaire jusqu'au niveau plus haut. Celui qui parlait, mon prédécesseur, parlait d'une approche ascendante. Voilà, nous aussi, nous tenons compte de cette approche ascendante. Et nous voulons que tous les décideurs soient informés sur la santé, l'équité et les conséquences durables des différentes options de politique. Et aussi la population doit être informée que la santé est l'affaire de tout le monde et la population adopte un comportement qui est favorable à la santé. Nous avons obtenu des axes stratégiques, on ne peut pas tout obtenir, nous avons fait des priorités. Voilà les 6 axes qui ont été obtenus pour notre stratégie. Il y a la jeunesse, les maladies transmissibles, les maladies non transmissibles, la nutrition, l'environnement et l'éducation. Et en bas, ce sont les documents d'orientation qui existent pour les 6 axes qui ont été retenus pour notre stratégie. Et notre stratégie ne vient pas pour révéler les choses, c'est pour renforcer ce qui existe déjà. Il y a ce qui existait, mais chacun travaille dans son coin. Mais nous voulons changer la façon de travailler. Il faut agir ensemble pour la santé de tous. Au lieu que chacun se mette dans son coin pour travailler, il faut travailler de manière... il faut travailler en synergie parce que la santé, c'est l'affaire de nous tous. La santé nous regarde de nous tous. C'est ça la santé dans toutes les politiques. Et quels sont les éléments clés de notre stratégie? Bien sûr, c'est une approche multisectorielle et nous voulons promouvoir l'équité, la durabilité et nous voulons coordonner, soutenir la collaboration intersectorielle et privilégier les engagements multisectoriels, gagnant-gagnant. On parlait de cette stratégie tout à l'heure de gagnant-gagnant. Pour éviter les conflits que mon ami vient de parler, si chacun tire son profit dans cette approche, il n'y aura pas de conflit. C'est ça l'approche gagnant-gagnant. Pour la mise en œuvre de notre stratégie, nous allons mettre en place des organes. Bien sûr, il y aura une unité qui sera chargée de coordonner cette approche et qui sera à mesure de communiquer avec les différents partenaires. Et nous allons mettre en place un comité de pilotage de plus haut niveau. Si nous parlons du plus haut niveau, c'est la présidence. Il faut que ça soit piloté au niveau du plus haut niveau. Et en plus, nous allons mettre en place des groupes de travail multisectoriels pour la mise en œuvre de cette stratégie de promotion de la santé. Voilà les actions possibles. On va mettre en place un logo pour parler de santé dans toutes les politiques. Et deuxième action possible, c'est le renforcement des capacités à tous les niveaux pour que tout le monde comprenne cette stratégie. Et voilà l'exemple de mise en œuvre possible de la santé dans toutes les politiques. Le point d'entrée peut être le milieu scolaire pour véhiculer les messages de santé dans toutes les politiques. Et comme perspective, je l'ai déjà dit, nous allons mettre en place des organes de mise en œuvre de cette stratégie. Et voilà que ça va très vite. La voix du Burundi maintenant a été entendue au monde entier. Nous sommes à Québec pour parler de la santé dans toutes les politiques. OK. Bien, comme conclusion, si nous voulons avoir la santé pour tous, les soins de santé primaires qu'on a parlé depuis Almata, les ODD, nous devons travailler de manière coordonnée, en synergie, coordonner l'information et l'éducation. C'est ça la santé dans toutes les politiques. Je vous remercie.
Right on time. It's pretty good. So, got to figure out how to turn this off now. So we'll hear next from Sylvie, who will be talking about case study from Quebec. And 10 minutes for you too, Sylvie.
Bonjour, et je vais essayer de parler rapidement pour laisser du temps à mon patron, qui avait des commentaires à faire. Alors, la traduction, c'est vrai. Alors, dans un premier temps, juste vous mentionner que la province de Québec, on a environ 8 millions d'habitants, ce qui représente à peu près le quart de la population du Canada, et qu'on a des zones qui sont urbaines ou rurales, ce qui veut dire que les réalités des Québécois peuvent être très différentes, dépendant si les gens demeurent à Montréal ou demeurent, par exemple, ou dans le Bas-Saint-Laurent. Alors, on a quand même une diversité de réalités pour nos Québécois. Il faut dire que le domaine de la santé, c'est de juridiction provinciale, alors que certains secteurs, comme l'agriculture, peuvent avoir une juridiction qui est partagée entre le fédéral et le provincial. Pour ce qui est d'aller tout de suite... Oups, les diapositives ne... Oh, attendez, c'est moi qui dois faire ça, excusez-moi, voilà. Pour ce qui est de la politique gouvernementale, la main était levée en arrière, je ne l'avais pas vu. La politique gouvernementale de prévention en santé, c'est une politique qui est sur une perspective de 10 ans, 2016-2025. Ce qu'on a fait, on a réuni 15 ministères et organismes pour décider des mesures qui seraient dans notre politique gouvernementale de prévention en santé. Ensuite, on a fait un plan d'action interministériel, le premier pour 2017-2021 et le deuxième est pour 2021-2025. La politique gouvernementale est sous le leadership de la ministre de la Santé. On se questionnait par rapport à le leadership. Quand nous avons fait le plan d'action interministériel, nous avons eu un budget de 20 millions par année. Je pourrais revenir un peu par rapport à ça. Mais on s'est questionné aussi à savoir, est-ce que le bureau de coordination et de soutien devrait relever davantage de la ministre de la Santé ou devrait relever davantage du ministère du Conseil exécutif, qui serait beaucoup plus près du premier ministre. mais comme on commençait nos démarches, on considérait que ça devait quand même rester au ministère de la Santé, en santé publique, pour s'assurer qu'on reste toujours, qu'on puisse toujours pousser par rapport à notre agenda de santé dans toutes les politiques. Et on avait peur que si déjà on s'en allait sous le ministère du Conseil exécutif, bien, premièrement, il aurait fallu que les gens l'acceptent, et cette responsabilité-là, mais aussi est-ce qu'on serait passé toujours après toutes les autres priorités qui peuvent arriver au niveau du gouvernement. Alors, par rapport au budget, Horacio a parlé beaucoup d'argent. On a eu 20 millions par année. Il faut voir qu'à l'époque où on a rédigé la politique gouvernementale, on était dans une période, même si notre gouvernement n'aimait pas utiliser le terme restriction budgétaire, mais c'était quand même une période où il y avait peu de budget. On a demandé beaucoup au ministère d'investir de leurs propres ressources au niveau de la politique, ce qui fait que certains ministères sont allés peut-être moins loin qu'ils auraient aimé parce qu'ils savaient qu'en s'engageant dans la politique, ils auraient des actions à livrer à même leurs propres ressources. Cette diapositive ici, dans le fond, vous montre que, comme on l'a mentionné au Québec, il y a quand même une historique de politique intersectorielle. Avant d'avoir la politique gouvernementale de prévention en santé, il y a eu aussi le plan d'action gouvernemental pour la lutte à l'obésité qui travaillait déjà avec d'autres ministères. Et on a aussi beaucoup d'autres politiques gouvernementales. Donc, la PGPS, qu'on appelle, n'est pas la seule politique gouvernementale où on travaille avec d'autres secteurs. Il y en a plusieurs autres. Ce qui fait justement que pour les ministères qui participent à la PGPS, ils ont des redditions de comptes à faire pour nous, mais il y en a aussi à faire dans leur propre politique ou dans leur collaboration avec d'autres politiques, ce qui peut rendre tout le processus de suivi et de reddition de comptes assez lourd. J'ai été chercher à la pause aussi les lapons où on résume un peu la politique gouvernementale français, anglais, mais vous avez un exemple ici des implications qu'on peut avoir. On a 4 orientations dans la politique. Une, c'est de développer les capacités des personnes dès leur plus jeune âge. L'autre, c'est l'aménagement des communautés et des territoires sécuritaires. Le troisième, c'est l'amélioration des conditions de vie. Et le quatrième, c'est renforcer la prévention dans le système de santé. Le quatrième, renforcer la prévention dans le système de santé, quand on va aller vers le deuxième plan d'action, va prendre de moins en moins de place parce qu'il y a quand même beaucoup d'investissements qui se sont faits à travers la prévention dans certains secteurs de la santé. Et il faut dire aussi que si on était allé jusqu'au bout des demandes qu'on a pu avoir dans notre premier plan d'action pour ce volet-là, on aurait déjà dépassé le 20 millions par année parce que les besoins sont énormes. Puis nous, ce que je n'ai pas mentionné, mais dans la distribution du montant d'argent, c'était vraiment important pour nous que le secteur de la santé ait pas plus que 50% de ce budget-là, parce qu'on sait que le secteur de la santé a déjà 50% du budget. Alors, si on travaille avec d'autres ministères et qu'en plus, on dit, bien sûr, l'investissement dans la politique, on va prendre la majorité du budget, à ce moment-là, quand on parlait de confiance et de collaboration, ça ne lançait pas du tout le message qu'on voulait lancer. Alors, on a vraiment essayé d'investir davantage avec les autres secteurs. Donc, l'objectif général de la politique, c'est d'influencer les déterminants pour améliorer la santé. Puis, c'est sûr que nous, on mise beaucoup sur la concertation de nos efforts pour s'assurer de... 3 minutes. Je vais aller plus vite. Je vais insister sur cette diapo-là qui est sur le gagnant-gagnant. C'est sûr que nous, on travaille beaucoup au niveau national, c'est-à-dire que ce qu'on a fait, c'est travailler beaucoup avec les autres ministères et organismes. On parlait d'équipes dédiées. Au ministère, on a une équipe dédiée de 3 personnes qui sont au bureau de coordination et de soutien. Alors, c'est vraiment pas beaucoup de personnes. Et c'est sûr que notre énergie est beaucoup allée sur le travail avec avec les autres ministères. Alors, à mon niveau, à moi, je travaille beaucoup au niveau national et on sait qu'on finance quand même des organismes ou des tables de concertation qui peuvent aller au niveau local, mais honnêtement, dans notre bureau, compte tenu du nombre limité de personnes, on est beaucoup au niveau national. Vous avez ici les cibles parce que quand on a rédigé au début de notre politique gouvernementale, nos politiciens trouvaient que c'était pas assez concret, alors on a mis aussi des cibles qu'on voulait atteindre d'ici 2025 pour que ça parle davantage. Juste vous dire, au niveau de la structure de la gouvernance intersectorielle, la façon dont on fonctionne, on a pour chaque mesure, il y a 28 mesures, 5 chantiers. Alors, il y a ce qu'on appelle on appelle ça, on a des équipes, des tandems qui travaillent ensemble, c'est au niveau professionnel pour chaque mesure. On a aussi un comité interministériel qui sont des directeurs et on a aussi un comité de sous-ministres qui, à ce moment-là, est animé par Horatio. On a beaucoup insisté sur le partenariat, dans le fond, et on sait qu'on innove un peu au niveau de la façon dont on travaille. Alors, on essaie de développer des outils de communication. Peut-être prendre 2 petites secondes pour vous dire que, justement, avec le gouvernement actuel, Horatio mentionnait qu'il va rencontrer éventuellement notre premier ministre. Il a rencontré aussi ce qu'on appelle le forum des sous-ministres. Et au niveau du forum des sous-ministres, c'est très rare qu'il y ait une présentation d'un dossier comme on l'a fait avec le docteur Arruda. Et dans le fond, le secrétaire général a dit que c'était important la prévention, mais avant d'arriver à ça, nous, on a fait des outils pour chaque ministère où on résumait ce que les investissements qu'on verrait s'il y avait un rehaussement. Et ça veut dire qu'il y a plusieurs sous-ministres étaient déjà sensibilisés. Alors, quand ils ont eu la présentation, ils savaient déjà de quoi on parlait. Fait que on a mis énormément d'énergie pour préparer ces outils-là, mais au bout du compte, je pense que ça a quand même été payant. Peut-être une petite seconde pour vous dire que les filles du bureau de coordination sont présentes. Il y a Amélie Sanson qui est là, Louise Saint-Pierre qui était notre coordonnatrice. Puis là, je ne vois pas Rosalie, mais Rosalie est ici aujourd'hui aussi. Parce qu'elles ont travaillé énormément fort. La sonnette. Juste vous dire d'abord, pour finir, comme on sait qu'on travaille en intersectoriel avec les autres ministères, on a aussi donné un mandat d'évaluation de notre gouvernance à une université puis ils travaillent, ils vont nous faire des rapports réguliers et on sait que ce qu'on va apprendre pour s'améliorer au niveau de la gouvernance intersectorielle va aussi aider les autres politiques que je vous montrais, bioalimentaires, dans d'autres secteurs, pour qu'eux aussi développent cette façon-là. On a des indicateurs de suivi qu'on fait aussi, mais comme je vous disais, c'est toujours l'enjeu de ne pas être trop lourd au niveau du suivi qu'on va faire à chaque année et trop exigeant. Mais notre Conseil du Trésor qui nous a donné de l'argent exige qu'on fasse un suivi comme ça au niveau des indicateurs. Désolée, Horatio, j'ai dépassé mon temps. Je n'ai pas pu t'en donner. Mais il y aura une période de questions et d'échanges tantôt. Alors les gens vont venir. Merci.
Thank you, Sylvie. So we have one more presentation before morning tea. George from Bhutan is going to come and speak just for 10 minutes. Write all your questions down and we'll get to them after morning tea.
Good morning. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit jet lagged, so you can see that I'm a little bit confused. Where's my presentation? Oh, okay. Let me introduce myself. My name is Doji Fope, and I am the Chief and Program Analyst of Health Promotion Division. It is such a great opportunity for me to present on the experiences of health in all policies in Bhutan. We are a small country, sandwiched between China in the north and India in the south. Small, landlocked Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan, and we are a population of less than 1 million. So exactly it's about 700,000, so you can imagine. So I would like to actually just run through, because I was actually thinking it will be about 15 minutes, but now we have only 10 minutes, so I'll just try to run through. Just the context, I think it's important for us to also understand the vision of Ministry of Health. And in the picture you will see the Crown Prince. He's only 3 years, and yet he's very, passionate about supporting health. So our vision is a nation with the best health. And we have been actually talking, I've been hearing from the presenters also that the most important for a small country like Bhutan, I think it's important that the structure is there. So if you look at the organogram of the Ministry of Health, we have Health Promotion Division as a very functional structure. And if you look at within the Health Promotion Division, we have a unit called Program and Partnership Division, and section which actually talks about health in all policies. Again, unlike I think many countries, we also have to understand that Bhutan is a country which provides health free of cost. It's provided by the state. The Constitution of Bhutan says that states shall provide free access to basic public health services, both in modern as well as traditional. So why I'm trying to speak this is because the context has to be clear so that you understand what I'm trying to talk. Now, why health in all policies? Why do we want to do it? I think most of you must have heard that we are a land of gross national happiness. And our development philosophy is gross national happiness. And also, we talk about health and well-being. Health is not only the responsibility of Ministry of Health, it cuts across. That's why health in all policies approach. And also, the success story of tobacco control in Bhutan, before health in all policies came through, was a success. And I'm sure you must have WHO, we have won an award, and I think we are the first country in the world to ban sale of tobacco and tobacco products. So I think that actually triggered us also that besides having a health in all policies approach, we could actually do it. And we thought that because this involved all multi-sectoral collaboration. And of course, then we have my colleagues also spoke about Almata and also the October Charter, and of course WHO's framework for health in all policies. But within that, we try to structure ourselves, not just copy-paste, but look at our own situation and see how we can go forward. And I think Ministry of Health is always, we don't want this type of approach that, it's the tap turner and then we are always sweeping the floor when all the damages are done. And if you look at the governance at national level, we are very fortunate to have the king and the elected government highest political commitment. And also we have very good reliable government structure. And the gross national happiness screening tools there I'll try to explain. And I do not want to actually run through all this because of time limitation. Now, just to contextualize, we have the 4 pillars of gross national happiness. And if you see me wearing this dress, and I think in the world, we have the largest pocket. I have everything here. Everything is here. And I'm here, you will see my king, my prime minister, UN General Assembly. So if you look at the 4 pillars, anything that we plan, any project, has to fit into that 4. Without that, it's never approved. So this is one of the strengths that we already have. And the 9 domains, if you look at health, and I think the presenter of public health actually spoke about public health, and Bhutan is already into it. Health, if you look at in 9 domains, if you look at all are actually time use, culture. I think the first presenter was actually talking about public health, but I couldn't because of French, there was some translation. And screening tool, what actually talks about is, it's a tool which actually looks at access policies and projects through gross national happiness lens. Select GNH enhancing policies and projects and reject projects and policies that adversely affect GNH. So whether you make $1 billion or FDI want to come and invest in Bhutan, if it doesn't fit through that, it doesn't. And health is a one component, it's always there. Coordinating structure, my colleague from Burundi actually also spoke, but here we are very trying to do something which is doable and try to maintain the structure. And within the Health Promotion Division and Ministry of Health, we have a National Health Promotion Steering Committee who looks after, and we have the Secretariat and we have other agencies. And mandates is, I think all of you know, that we advise the government, review policy, ensure that allocation of at least 1% of agency annual budget is kept, not only in Ministry of Health, but other ministries and agencies have to make sure that 1% of their budget has to be kept for health promotion and disease prevention. So I think this is, and at the multi-sectoral level, what we have is the issue-based specific government level committee through. First one is the National Health Policy 2011. The second is the National Health Promotion Strategic Plan. My colleague Brunei was also talking about this was developed from 2015 till 2023. We have the multi-sectoral action plan for prevention and NCDs. So I think during the 74th UN General Assembly, the specific session was on universal health coverage and NCDs. And I think Bhutan made our stand very clear that we are going to achieve universal coverage and SDG before the timeline. So this is a commitment and we will do it. And we also have the national policy change for reduce alcohol, because alcohol is the biggest problem in Bhutan. And Ministry of Health has been pushing, but the other economic and all, they want to make money. But so we actually have this, so that is, and also we have the suicide prevention. So in a small way, a small country is trying to actually achieve, and I thought that this will be useful for other bigger countries where, how Bhutan is progressing. And these are the documents that I was trying to actually show. And National Health Promotion Strategic Plan is the document that actually tries to put all under whatever NCD also we are, this is how we will be. And collaborating partners, gross national happiness in other countries is the Planning Commission. So we have, and then other line agencies, and at the local level, we have the local government leaders who actually contribute. And I'm happy to report here that the current 12 5-year plan, which started from 2018 till 2020, all 20 districts local government has mainstreamed health promotion, disease prevention in their local plan. That's the biggest achievement, which means they have already allocated budget, only 1 minute. Role of Ministry of Health, leadership, and I'm sorry because I thought all the way coming from Bhutan, 3 days to reach here. I could not come here, so so I thought, but I'll just share this to all the, so that you can see. But I think the role is also evidence. When we talk of alcohol, we have solid evidence to say that the money that we spend on treating alcohol, liver cirrhosis disease versus the income that you generate is so that government listens. And also we have the, we are health in all policies, we are in the progressing. We are progressing. We have not established yet. We are progressing, and we will be. Monitoring evaluation is done through 5-year plans, NO plan, and also through public projects, and which will be screened through. Okay, so I think just give me 1 minute, please, because I just want. So I think just to be very clear, this is how we measure. For example, health in all policies, output indicator and outcome indicator. At the end, we just talk, but at the end, this is how we measure. So this is, and also in terms of capacity, just 2 small examples. This is how, otherwise then the Prime Minister will say that, health in all policies doesn't. So there is already policy where we will be measuring. Lesson learned, HiAP in progress, and HiAP can actually make significant contribution and achievement for SDGs. I think this is the key where Bhutan will be, and I think other countries also. And future plan is now health and impact assessment. Is again another, because I was showing you the tap turner and the floor. So we don't want to do that. So we make sure that health impact assessment is done in any projects or anything that before the institute. So this is, and again, we are also saying that at least 20% of the budget has to be allocated for health promotion and discrimination. And the current government, we have Prime Minister as the doctor, he's a doctor. 3 cabinet ministers are also previous. So we hope that in this plan we can really carry forward. So these are some of the pictures how actually, because we are talking of, I heard talking of bottom up and top down. If you look at here, we have all these, during the development of, so we have the monks, the local government leaders, and all this. So if you look at the red robes are the religious person, we make sure that everybody is together. So thank you, and this is what I have to say. Finally, I would like to say that if we are all together, I take this opportunity here to come all the way from Bhutan, actually to show small things that we have done, and also learn and network from others so that we can work together for better outcome of good health and well-being of not only Bhutan, but for the whole country, for the whole nation in this world. Thank you, and Tashtele.
I think Georgie has summed up what the purpose of this meeting is, getting everybody together to network and to learn from each other, and so that we can do better things for the health and wellbeing of our communities, which I guess is a nice segue into morning tea, where you get to go and do that meeting and networking. But I think we'll get people back at 11:05. Only 15 minutes, so make the most of it and bring your cups of tea and coffee back with you if you need to. 15 minutes.